let's have a conversation about deciding. Okay. This week at JTD, our subject, our focus, our intention, the intention we held was decide. All right. Because you get to decide who you get to be. That's really the vibe. Okay. So family, let's talk about it. All right. Let's talk about my personal relationship with making decisions. Okay. And what I got to learn through breaking the habit of being myself, through my identity shifting work, and because here's the beauty about shifting your identity and installing a new software and reprogramming yourself, recoding yourself, is when you go through that process, you get an overview of who you used to be, right? You get an overview of, your old self, your old belief systems, your old stories that you told, just your old state of mind, your old state of being. You get to really see who you used to be, and you get to learn so much about you. Like, gosh, oh, wow, this is who I used to be. And you get to learn why you used to be who you used to be. You know what I mean? So here's what I got to learn through breaking the habit of being myself, how I used to relate with making decisions. All right. And like I did say on my previous video, that everything is expressed through you. Everything is based on how you relate with the subject, right? So everything is a relationship. The stories you tell about the subject, the beliefs you hold around the subject, how you perceive the subject, and however you perceive the subject, it's how you'll experience it. It's how you'll receive it, right? Because everything is expressed through you, right? It is an extension of you. It is a mirror of you, right? So, as I was doing the inner work and, um, the self work, here's what I got to learn about the girl I used to be, right? First of all, family, I used to describe myself, which is crazy business, as an indecisive person, right? So unintentional. I sang the song for so many years. Let me tell you something. My entire 20s. And especially when I learned about, like, being a Gemini and, the characteristics of being a Gemini and how we're, like, obviously the twin aspect of a Gemini and how we struggle with making decisions. And geez, babe, I mean, I was singing the song and wow, I got to see how by singing that song and telling that story about myself and identifying myself in that kind of way, I that became my truth. Here's what I got to learn about me being an indecisive person and choosing that identity, right? Because that is a decision. I chose it. That's a choice, honey. So I chose to be an indecisive person. And that showed me the lack of self-trust, you know? And that's why my theme this year is self-trust. Everything that I do this year, it's about me trusting myself, and making decisions has everything to do with self-trust. You gotta make decisions, babe. You gotta trust yourself enough to make decisions, and the power of making a decision is clarity. Like, once you make a decision, you receive clarity. Once you make a decision, you chose a direction. Once you make a decision, you are in alignment, right? So we are normally described as human beings as creators, right? So we hear that a lot. Like, we are creators. I am a creator. And truly, we really, really are. We come to this world to desire more, to want more, to expand. We seek expansion. Well, I don't even know if we seek expansion. Well, I guess we seek it, but it's inevitable, right? Growth is a big component to our existence, right? And we grow through desires. Okay, so we're always receiving desires, and your desires are your here. This is all what I've just gotten to learn, right, family? Desire is another topic for another day, right? And that's an intention we're going to hold very soon, and it's a subject we're going to talk about very soon. My relationship with desires. I got to learn so much about myself through my relationship with my desires. my how I held my desires, how I received my desires, how I sustained my desires. Like, I got to learn so much about myself through my desires. And the reason why I talk about desires is because we live to receive desires, right? Because our desires are a mirror of us. They're an extension of us. Our, our desires are the expansion, right? They are the new self that we desire to be. They're the new truth we are desiring to uphold and hold and embody, right? So when you receive your desire from God, which is a communication from God, right? When you receive your desire, the next step from just receiving your desire is deciding, right? And once you decide, you are, right? So that's the shift with this, with once you understand the superpower of deciding, you, well, rather, let me say this. Once I understood the power of deciding, I got to learn myself truly who I used to be. And I used to struggle with making decisions, right? And when you struggle with making decisions, it means that you really live in misalignment, right? Because I lingered a lot. I lived in indecision, right? So I lived in split energy. Because once you decide, you embody. That is your new truth. You've decided. That's the power of making a decision, right? So when I got to understand the power of making decisions, I got to see, oh my goodness, like I really lived in misalignment. The time I took in not making decisions and lingering in making a decision really made me, live in misalignment. You know what I mean? And I also got to learn and see how I my inability to make a decision was me struggling to trust my knowing, my truth, my new self. You know, like when you don't trust yourself, you don't even trust your desires. You know, you don't, and when you don't trust yourself, you don't believe yourself, you don't believe in yourself. You know what I mean? So I got to really, really have this, I got to see myself so differently. I got to really learn myself. I got to understand myself so differently from this journey with myself and coming home to myself and um shifting my identity. Like, gosh, like my relationship with deciding told a deep truth about me. My description of myself as being an indecisive person said a lot about me. Like it's not a small thing at all. And because deciding is 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 clarity. Once you decide, you align with clarity. Once you decide, you have decided on the direction. There's clarity, you're clear. Once you decide, there's alignment. There's an identity, there's an embodiment. Once you decide, there's certainty. Not because you're certain of the outcome, but you're certain of who you are. You know what I mean? And that changes your inner posture. It changes your posture, your aura. And once I understood making decisions in that way, I got to see why I was who I was. And I got to see why I never really received my desires in totality. You know what I mean? Why I never received my desires in fullness, man. You know, my relationship with with deciding, made me understand my life experience so far. The girl of my 20s era. It made me understand fully that, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Why it almost felt like life was unfair. why don't I get what I desire? Like, why does it, cause how I received most of my desires was like, there was so much of me almost like there was some level of settling, right? Some level of like, um, being willing to, you know, hold space for, it may not come this way. You know what I mean? Just hold space for disappointment. You know what I mean? You, so you can see how even in that, like, I just lacked self-trust, and that's why, like, this year for me, it's like, that was the aha moment for me. Like, I just need to rebuild self-trust. Of course, you're born having trust with self-trust, but as you go on this life journey, they're experiences that make you doubt yourself, right? And you start to embody this lack. And it's a matter of rebuilding. When you come home to yourself, you come home to God. And like I always say, at JTD, we believe we are one with God. We're not separate from God. And when you come home to yourself, you understand the amount of power you hold. And deciding was one of my awakenings, and like, oh my goodness, like deciding is a superpower. You know what I mean? This is a superpower, and you have to make decisions fast, and you have to trust yourself. People who make decisions fast are people who trust themselves. You know what I'm saying? And you trust that, because when you live in that inner knowing and self-knowing, self-understanding, you know that things work out for you. You know what I mean? And even when something doesn't work out the way that you thought, you make another decision. Like, it's about, life is about making decisions. You have to make decisions. You know what I mean? So it's like, I really got to learn a lot and see why, my 20s era, why I experienced what I experienced, and why I aligned with what I aligned with in my life, and the people I met, the experiences I had. You can really tell that, for me, I really just lacked decision making. You know what I mean? And decisive decision making, being a decisive woman.